So there was an interesting question raised a couple days ago. I noticed about Edmonton and their prospect pool and how they develop their prospects. And I thought, yeah, all right. I'm not going to talk about who they've drafted and missed. In other words, I'm not going to talk about who they could have drafted and didn't, because that's a whole other topic that we've talked about a lot. So I want to talk about some hits and misses, and yes, there have been some drafting issues with Edmonton and some issues with turning their prospects from prospects to legit NHL players. Now, obviously, Connor McDavid with his 19 points this year is not in this conversation. Connor McDavid is, I believe, the best player in the NHL. I know there's people who will say Crosby. I know there are people who will say McKinnon. I know there are people who will say a lot of other names, and I'm not here to debate that fact. We're talking about Edmonton right now. Now, currently, Darnell Nurse has 1 goal and 4 assists in 12 games. He was a number 7 pick in 2013. His development's been interesting. The physical side is there. I think the offensive side is starting to show up now, and I think that he will be their best all-around defenseman for some time to come, barring Clefbaum getting back to where he was a couple years ago. Kaier Yamamoto, 11 games, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points for him. He's a number 22 draft pick in 2017. I'm going to say this for Yamamoto. When you're a number 22 draft pick, you're not likely to be a superstar. You are likely to be a support player. You might be getting your skilled winger at 22. I understand Brock Besser was drafted at 23 in 2015, but he's the exception rather than the rule. Your superstar players are normally found at the very top end of the draft. Of course, this morning, Evan Bouchard's in the news because the Oilers have sent him back to juniors, which is a good move. He's played 7 games this year, had 1 goal, looked great in the preseason, but as the season wears along, and this is kind of what happens, it catches up to him. So you'll keep Garrison and you'll let Bouchard go back to juniors where he can dominate. He's a number 10 draft pick this past season, and I think Bouchard could end up being a very solid top 4 defenseman for the Oilers. So the fact that he gets returned to juniors, not entirely a surprise to me. It was kind of a surprise that he made the team in the first place. Puljujärvi. Puljujärvi's the one that may very well be polarizing on this. The thing is, he has 1 goal in 8 games this year. He's a number 4 draft pick in 2016, but at the time of that draft, because there's a reaction video on this channel, he was considered the 3rd best player available. Many, myself included, very surprised that Dubois ended up going at 3 and felt that Puljujärvi dropping to 4 was huge news. Turned out it really wasn't. Dubois has currently got 8 points for the Columbus Blue Jackets and looks like an excellent center, and Puljujärvi is still trying to find his way in the NHL. I don't look at the totals these guys have put up and put this on Edmonton's development system. I think that, we look at development and we say, well, this guy's developed into a star. But I look at where they're drafted, and for me it's more of, if a guy falls in the draft or if a guy's a late first rounder, there's probably something, there's a flaw there. There's some reason that scouts found that said to teams that were drafting earlier, don't draft that guy. So again, we can look at teams that get steals later, and I can definitely do videos and research on the topic, but I don't think Edmonton's necessarily bad at drafting. Here's some examples. 2016 entry draft, Puljujärvi's the only one who's played. But while that may be true, there are some prospects in that bunch that could still make it. We're only a couple years out from that draft, right? 2015, McDavid was the only pick they had until 117. That's Caleb Jones that was 117. And on 124 that year, they got Ethan Bear. And Oiler fans saw with Ethan Bear at the end of last season how good he could be. And I think he's still developing, and I think he could still be a solid defenseman for them. 2014, of course, they got Draisaitl. Draisaitl's played 280 games. He's got 220 points in those 280 games. And the next pick after Draisaitl was number 91. So if anything, over these 2 years, what's happened is the Oilers didn't have enough draft picks. It really, drafting is a lot like winning the lottery. Your chances of winning are slim, but the more tickets you have, the more numbers you play, the better your chance is to win. And for the Oilers, they just didn't have enough prime prospects, or prime draft picks. Darnell Nurse in 2013 was their first round pick, of course. He's played 208 games in the NHL. Number 88 that year was Slepyshev. He's played 102 games in the NHL. Of course, he's not in the NHL right now. So again, this is before Chiarelli comes in. So this is before the new brain trust takes over. 2012, of course, Yakupov's number 1. We talk about how he was a bust for the Edmonton Oilers, but at number 63 was Jujhar Khaira. And Jujhar Khaira is a very solid pick at 63 and has turned into a very serviceable top 9 forward who has, I think, more scoring upside than he gets credit for. 2011, of course, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins was number 1. He looked like a bust at different points in time, but he's found excellent chemistry with Connor McDavid, and now Nugent-Hopkins is putting up point-a-game totals, as was expected when he was drafted. Klefbom was number 19 that year. Klefbom had a very poor season last year, but he's looked better to start the year this year, and I think last year was just a setback for him. And number 114 that year was actually Toby Reeder. So Toby Reeder, who's now on the Oilers, was the number 114 draft pick that year. So basically, you could make the argument when you just look at these players and the fact that none of their draft picks on that list have more than 1 goal. You could say, yeah, this is the Oilers and the way they develop, and they can't develop guys. I look at where guys are developed, and I don't look at Puljujärvi and say that the Oilers ruined him. This goes back to Gilbert Brulé, for me, as a guy that's an example of that, where Columbus drafts him early. Did they put him in the NHL too early? Probably. And then the thought process was, well, Brulé was ruined forever because they brought him to the NHL early. I don't believe in that. I think that the player ultimately is responsible for how he does. I think if a player's overwhelmed at the NHL level, there's nothing wrong with admitting it to your coach, to your GM. Admitting it to the press might be a problem. But honestly, I think with Puljujärvi, there have been chances. With Yamamoto, there have been chances. I don't know that Kyler is... I just don't know that he's an NHLer, a full-time NHLer. But it's early. And again, he was a number 22 draft pick. He's not a top 3. He's not a top 5. I think sometimes that we expect a first-round draft pick by the Edmonton Oilers. Well, that has to be a top 5, so he should be a good player. I think they drafted so early so often that we just expect a first-round draft pick from Edmonton to be one of those top 5 prospects. And in some cases, it doesn't work. Anyways, I'd be interested to know what you guys think, especially for Oiler fans. Do you think there's a problem with the development of prospects in the Oilers system? I think a lot of that is on the players. I think it's easy to throw stones at the teams when a player doesn't live up to expectation. Ultimately, I think that responsibility lies with the players. Be interested to know your thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Just tapping upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.